Welcome to the Caplaner podcast, where we dive into the dynamic world of private capital markets. Whether you're new to private market investing or a seasoned professional, this podcast unpacks the latest trends, insights, and opportunities shaping the industry. Featuring expert guests and deep discussions, Caplaner is your go-to resource for staying informed and inspired. Hello and welcome to the Caplaner podcast. Today, Jody and I are joined by the one and only Julie Wainwright, who is the founder of The RealReal. And Julie, I think you have a number of different titles, but that is the one, at least in Jody's and mine world, that holy grail.
Holy Grail, as Morgan said, she went to bed last night so excited about the podcast and shopping on The RealReal, which is pretty much a nightly ritual for all of us. So, Julie, welcome.
Thanks. It's good to be here. I think I've known you, Jody, since I was young. We've known each other for quite a while.
Well, if you were young, I was young too. We were in the Bay Area. We'll couch it for those of who are listening. So I was in Mill Valley, but working, running my company in San Francisco. And you really, I remember when you started The RealReal. And I remember then, I knew you were onto something in addition to you knowing you were onto something, because I came from the fashion business. I had a background I interned at Vogue magazine in London and worked for Ralph Lauren Women's Wear in New York with some of the retailers. So, but give us a little bit of history. I mean, anyone can Google you and see The RealReal, but maybe in your own words, you could tell us the story.
The RealReal and how I started it, or
Yeah, and your pets.com. I mean,
I'll give you the nickel tour here. All right. So I moved to the Bay Area because I got a job at Clorox right out of undergraduate school. I was the second undergraduate they ever hired in brand management. And about 2.5 years on, when I'd already been promoted once and was possibly going to get promoted again, it's a pretty narrow pyramid, but it looked like things were going my way. The guy in finance smuggled in an Apple II computer and ran all the P&Ls we had been doing by hand that he would check in minutes on VisiCalc. And I'm like, this is the future. I got to get out of here. This is ridiculous. And my former boss, who was the brand manager on Clorox, had left the company. His wife called me and asked me to join a small company called Software Publishing back in the 80s. So I went from wearing little bow blouses and sensible heels down to Silicon Valley, where the first thing, one of the engineers, who was a woman, came up to me. She had no shoes on. Her name was Dee Dee. And she goes, "Do you wear underwear? Because I'm trying to figure out the value of underwear." And I thought, well, I am definitely in another world. But Software Publishing's claim to fame was they introduced the precursor to PowerPoint. It was called Harvard Graphics. In fact, they developed the category online. The business got to about 600 million. And so I started early in that world. I went in as a product manager, ended up running international, and came back to run Harvard Graphics and be a group product manager. So I started early, ended up getting promoted.
Started early being successful. That's what we want to highlight. You started early with a career.
Yes, but I had no way of knowing that company was going to be successful. What I knew was whatever was happening in the personal computer software industry was the future. There was no doubt in my mind.
Did you come from a family of entrepreneurs? I think in your book you talk about your dad, and you're a Midwesterner at heart. I mean, I think that's always something that you were not a California native, kind of like growing up in the redwood trees with no shoes. You went to, Purdue for undergraduate and then obviously ended up in California. But were you always kind of on that entrepreneur track where you thought you would start your own company? It was just a matter of time?
So, like many women, I kept feeling, first of all, my dad was a great entrepreneur and he loved his doing business. So having that energy in a house when someone's coming home and they love what they're doing it's actually a joy and a blessing, to be honest. He loved having his own business. He loved calling on clients. He loved being a commercial artist. And he had companies like Bayer and Chevrolet and the old Studebaker and Kohler. So he was doing some really fun work. For me personally, I really wanted to be in packaged goods, and I wanted to actually live in California because I didn't see a future for myself in Indiana. I just didn't see it happening.
So Clorox and then Berkeley Systems, and then what did you
I went software publishing and then a company called Power Up, which software publishing and spun off. And I kept moving back and forth to London, running international. And then there was this big roll up time of these personal computer software companies led by Kevin O'Leary, where they were rolling up and stopping development and just putting software packages and spinners and selling them like they were packaged goods products. So he had bought a company that I was working for called Spinnaker when I was in London. I moved back. I got a job at Berkeley Systems, and it was a turnaround. I didn't know it at the time, but I came in, and this was, I mean, I feel like I'm talking ancient history here, but it's when you had software in a package that was in a store, and they had shipped in tons of product into the channel. I started in January, and all like something like 80% of that product they shipped in was coming back in, and they were cash tight. So here's what I did. I was a VP of sales and marketing. It was a nightmare. I had a really good CFO. We worked on it. I wrote a plan to save the company, which included layoffs. And I took it to the CEO, who was the founder, and then we took it to the board. And they're like, okay, you do it. You're president. So, and I did it. But I mean, I had a
by
good,
fire, right?
yeah, well, I think women do get promoted when things aren't going well. And then the next thing was getting the company into a more focused and getting them into their core sweet spot. And their sweet spot was entertainment. They were the first flying toaster screensaver company, but they really were an entertainment company. They were trying to do everything at that time. And we introduced a game called You Don't Know Jack, which was a huge bestseller. And I needed to raise more money for the company. And the founder sold the company pretty much over the weekend when I had a term sheet coming in to another one of those terrible roll-ups. But anyway, so that happened. You know, that was my first trial by fire with going back to investors. We had a term sheet. We had a signed term sheet. And he
But all the
literally
while,
called me.
though, as you continue on with your story, it turns out this was very good feeding ground for you because understanding the board meeting and understanding working with investors and understanding a term sheet and all of the deal components, really you ended up leveraging. So keep going. We
It
want to
was,
hear the
you know
whole
what?
story.
Honestly, it was great. It was great. Everything's great. I mean, actually, you know, even when you're going through bad things, which we're not quite at the bad things, the learning is just exponential at all times. And the beauty of being in the software industry or any tech field or a high growth business, there are opportunities to succeed and fail all the time and opportunities to learn. When you're in a high growth business, all kinds of opportunities can open up. The next thing was a company called Real.com, which was the first site to sell movies. I should mention in the middle there, I got married. One of my
Very
trips,
important.
to London, and then he moved back with me. So Real.com was the first site to sell movies. Netflix wasn't around yet, but they were getting funded to do rentals. And we got an early offer. I got it up to, I think, probably 50 million almost in the second year. So we're talking 1997,
So real
1998.
revenue, you knew.
Real
Again, you were
revenue.
very bottom line and top line oriented.
And Hollywood Entertainment came in and made an offer to buy the company, and Blockbuster was circling around. And by the way, Hollywood Entertainment doesn't exist anymore. Nor does,
Neither does Blockbuster,
oh,
does it?
I think they do on TV. And there's one store, someone said in Portland, that still has the name. But anyway, so that company was sold for 100 million pretty quickly. And then I was offered a job to run pets.com and take it over from an entrepreneur who was doing $100,000 of business out of his second bedroom in his apartment in LA. And so he's actually just said, here, take this, and raised money, got it which is what, as hard as I had put together a team, raise money, including from Amazon and Hummer Winblad. And Hummer Winblad had put money in Berkeley Systems. That's where I met them. So and then took it public, and then it crashed and burned, and then
We
actually
have to talk about how it crashed and burned and what else happened. You mentioned getting married in your personal life. So I remember you telling this story repeatedly of the crash and burn was not only a crash and burn professionally at that time, but it was also the day that your husband asked you for a divorce.
right. It was. But if people can remember, because it was 25 years ago, there was a dot-com bubble bursting,
Yeah,
and 1,100 companies went out of business, including a company called Webvan, which was the precursor to someone
the
like
delivery.
Instacart, or even DoorDash, and they had lost over $1 billion. But
Crazy.
Pets.com, we'd done a good job building up our brand, and we had a little puppet, a little sock puppet that was the spokesperson for for the brand, and that little dog sock puppet is still floating around whenever someone wants to bring that .com burst out. But literally the day I was telling all employees I was going to shut the company down and hold job fairs for them and was going to give them severance, but it was over. My husband asked me for a divorce.
Ugh.
You've told this story a number of times during the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. We host a women's event for all women executives and CEOs and investors. And we held it one year where you were still at the Real Real. You told us this story, and then you told us all of the items that held their value and what we should be buying and shopping. But it was really a remarkable story because it wasn't a woman in that room. And I'm sure there's not a person who's not going to listen to this podcast who doesn't remember a day when things really doubled down for them. Like it wasn't just one thing, but it was multiple things. With that, you never, and Morgan touched upon this because we read a little bit, and obviously in your book that you have written here, Time to Get Real, which I've been reading, and you talk about your dad and his perseverance, and also you being from the Midwest, so you had a lot of grit and a lot of stamina.
I think, that's one of those words people like to get on. And, what happened was grit isn't something you can actually, I think, just give someone, or, you can't like grade it. But look, when I was a kid, when you think about a dire situation, my mom was 28 years old. My dad was turning 30, and he had just quit his job and started his business. They had 4 kids, and my mom was in the hospital, and they said she was dying. And I was the oldest of 4 kids. And my dad turned to me and said, "You're going to have to help and step up and raise the kids." All right. Which was, I was 8. So you're going to really
Right.
have to step up now, because I was the oldest. And the youngest was 9 months old, by the way.
Yeah.
So my mom didn't die till later, but she did have MS. So it took another 8 years for that to be properly diagnosed. And then after that, it was a rapid decline. But I would say having that level of responsibility and feeling like you had to do it did build grit. And the other thing, which both my parents did, which I is such a gift, is they used to always say to me, "Well, when I'd ask a question as a kid, well, what do you think? You're smart. You can figure it out." So
Right.
having that drilled into my head, probably from the age of the first time I asked why, which is round 2, when people start asking why, and just being told you're smart and you can figure it out, and then they'd have a dialogue with me about my answer. What That was a gift, and sad, and even the hardships in the family were a gift. But can you imagine being basically thinking you're going to be a single parent, you have no money coming in, you just started a company, and you have 4 kids?
No. I've been on not to that degree of it, but I remember the years when my mom was building J. Thelander, and I remember because it used to be a survey schedule where the reports were published, on a cycle. And I remember so vividly seeing my mom sitting at the kitchen counter at like 10 o'clock at night. You'd come up and get something, and she was sitting with the laptop looking over, and she was going through all of the numbers, and she knew every firm and because the data never left the business. It never went to somebody else to do it. It really was Jay Thelander Consulting and Surveys. And I remember when the days when the reports would go out talking about, Blockbuster and the stores where you would go get the movies, we always took it as a family victory lap when a compensation report was sold. And
And
it was
also,
like,
though, Morgan, to your point, Julie, you mentioned the .com era, right? And that is where the survey business really took off for me because I had worked for a number of .coms, were in the residual auction space, and having worked at Vogue in London, the Condé Nast piece of it was attractive. So they were trying to publish online dailies, all things that you're aware of, especially in your bird's eye view now of being such a innovator and disruptor in the fashion business. But at that time when the dot-com bubble burst, I was really scared. I mean, you were scared for different reasons, but I was scared because I had, this is probably why I'm understanding now why you and I are friends on so many levels. I had 2 little kids at home. And that's when I started really the surveys because I knew I needed a product because I couldn't just be swinging from the chandeliers waiting for a company to get funded and another to get funded. I needed a product.
And boy, that was a time of reinvention. Sadly, though, I took pets.com hard and I internalized it too much. So there were a lot of newspapers telling me, a lot of articles online
Yeah.
and offline telling me I was a failure, telling the company was the biggest failure ever. And I think even somebody wrote like I was the dumbest person in the industry. And,
people could never write that now. It was like, could you imagine seeing that on a headline somewhere, especially just you're like, and then things happen. But my question
well,
for
I mean, you fast forward and,
right,
Chewy's been around for timing's everything. Chewy.com is pets.com.
right,
There's like not
totally.
even any daylight between the companies, to be
No,
honest.
you're totally correct. My question for you is, okay, so you have this moment of combustion between your personal life and pets.com and the environment of what's going on with the .com bubble bursting. And how did you go from there to getting the idea for the Real Real and then executing it?
Well, look, nothing great happened for the next 8 years, to be honest. I mean, Hummer Winblad would employ me. I would do these gigs. I had a company that was really, I just got offered terrible jobs. And finally, when also I didn't like being a consultant, but then a lot of people didn't want me to consult because I'd failed at pets. They're like, what does she know? All right. So I figured out I had a recruiter set me down and his last name was Love. And I was like, I had to change his last name in the book, but his last name was really Love. And I remember walking out, and this Mr. Love showed me no love at all. He actually said, you're unemployable in the Valley.
Julie, it's so
And
crazy. Who had the last laugh there? Joke's on you, Mr. Love.
I know, but think of that. That's a gift.
Yeah, that's true. Not everyone looks at it the way you do, but that's the best part about you is that you looked at every if anything that happened that was negative as a challenge to rise and be better and do something different and keep winning.
And so what I had to figure out, I gave myself 2 years. I'm like, okay, I'm clearly letting other people define me. I have to stop that. And all right, let's just take what he said is true. I'm unemployable. I also love entrepreneurs. I've always loved entrepreneurs. I had entrepreneur envy. So I thought I'll give myself 2 years to figure out what to do, or I'm just going to have to pack up my bag and leave the state. It really felt that dramatic. And so when my back was against the wall, I knew I wanted to get into e-commerce again. I had mapped out what Amazon could do and couldn't do. One of the areas was luxury. I thought, well, that's ridiculous. I'll never start a luxury brand. And then I was shopping with my friend, Ann Wimblad, and we went into a small store in Menlo Park called Head Over Heels that had beautiful shoes, name brand shoes in the front, and they had consignment in the back. And that's where Anne shopped. And as soon as I saw that, I'd never seen it before. I thought, that is my business. I couldn't believe she
I
was
remember you telling
buying.
the story that Anne looked at. So Anne, for those of you that are listening to this, is from Hummer Winblad. Anne Winblad, always an icon and very capable, amazing woman. But I remember you said she was looking at something Chanel, and you said to her, like, "Really, Anne? It's used." And she
Right.
said, "Honey, it's still Chanel."
All right, exactly. And it's a great value, and I thought that is it. And I thought, okay, this is the business. And I asked her so many questions. We had gone together. She was driving on the way down. I had so many questions. Like, have you ever shopped in a consignment store? Have you ever shopped on eBay? She kept saying, no, no. I'm like, you just bought consignment. I went home that night, researched the market, tried to figure out how many SKUs eBay had and how they were doing, looked for anywhere that tried to say that people were doing this online. Then I started consigning everywhere. And I thought, I can make such a great company doing this. But I know, and this has never changed, I knew that it had to have these attributes. Number one, we had to authenticate goods. There were too many fakes on the market. Number two, as for the consumer, we had to set the price because the marketplace knew more information than the individual. So the market would set the price. And number three, consigners, we had to offer them a service because we didn't want just product coming in that we couldn't use. We wanted product coming in that we knew would have good resale value, that would reinforce the brand as luxury. And we could also then make it easy because honestly, consigning was hard. No one was going to take things to the post office and wait and ship it someplace. It was too hard. And most of the people that buy luxury do not have that kind of attitude where they're going to say, oh, I'll self-post it. I'll do it myself. No. In fact, Anne had never dropped things off at a consignment store. She ended up being a really good consigner. She tried to push everything on her sister, and her sister's like, you know what? I've got enough of this now. And so, it became like we had to offer a service, authenticate, set the price, boom. And I knew I needed a sales team. So I came up with the idea in November. In June, beginning of June, we opened the doors, and I'd rented a really interesting tiny warehouse. And
Remember, I went to that opening, South of Market. Claudia Ross did your PR. And I remember going to that, and there were racks of clothing there.
Yes. Yep. And it was gritty. It was gritty.
Remember, I actually had a girlfriend who was on your sales team. Like when you first started in your offices, were down in Embarcadero. And I thought it was the coolest job of all time because she got to hear what was going to be coming in and was working with the people who would go to your house and pick up the items. And my mom had people come and pick up the items, people who she's still friends with.
Some of my closest friends.
Right. And I think it's really where, first of all, I was upset because I was in college and I would look on the RealReal and I would look on her account. And I'd be like, you sold that? You didn't give it to me? That's so rude. How could you do this to me? Right. And she was like, but that was the whole thing. It was the idea where all of a sudden basically, of course, the impact of what the RealReal has had on so many people, but you really did revolutionize the way that women have access to high-end luxury goods, because not only can people get things that they're looking at now, but you've also unlocked this whole vintage market of things that people have had that are not made anymore or are not made as good as they were in the past. And it's like a whole hunt where the way that you can search for items and save searches, and now it makes so much sense hearing your whole career from being in marketing and packaged goods and services that of course you had this because all of these pieces came together in this moment where it was like, boom, this is it.
Plus, it's a very sophisticated technology business, and it got more
really
so. Not at the beginning. Not at the beginning. It was all the money went to, we used a platform to get started, and then the real money went on getting the goods in. So building up the sales team. And once we got to a certain level, then it if you think about the company's well over $1 billion in top line sales now. And if you reverse engineer that, that means that about anywhere from 200 to 500,000 things, used things come into the app centers every month. All right, 500,000. So it's heavy tech now on the back end using AI and machine learning. But at the beginning, it was like
that.
No, it was all about get those salespeople out there and bring in the goods. And it was, every time you opened a box, it was exciting.
Not to mention on the business side, you had a fundraise every 6 months. What was that like?
Oh my God. That was always challenging. And it was challenging because men never got it. You know, they had to ask their wives. I mean, we did learn that, like, um, which we had to learn the hard way. If we went to someone's house that was a potential investor and their wife didn't have anything luxury, just take it, photograph it, put it on the site, buy it ourselves. You know, because we did. We had to learn that the hard way. We
Right.
did, because the women were like, I'll never forget. We went to a pretty large blue chip firm, and they were so excited. We're going to one of the senior partners' house, and the wife had nothing. She had like juicy couture, remember, which is not couture. It was velour sweatpants. That was her big couture. And we could, and the people didn't pick anything up. She was so insulted.
Yeah, so that was never again did that happen.
Never. And they didn't go through with the term sheet. And he said, well, I have a mosaic of information of why this won't work. I thought, And then I made a call to the salesperson. I'm like, all right, well, we'll never do that again. We'll just pick it all up,
Yeah,
tell
you
them they're
learn once,
great.
and that's the best part about you. You learn once and you never repeat it again, and from the good things and the bad things, you kept on going with what
Yeah,
made sense.
always pushing through. Everything's a learning experience. I think the biggest challenge is people have to feel safe to say it didn't work, right?
Right.
So your employees have to feel safe that, oh, I can talk about this not working because I'm not going to get beaten up. In fact, that's one of my hot buttons. I have to say, I have one of those tempers that only comes out once in a while. But when it
Tell us.
comes
I'd like
out,
to know what
well, no,
pisses you off.
what pisses me off is if things aren't working, you don't own it, because then you can't solve it.
Right.
You know, when people are sort of like, want to go, like, look over here at this shiny thing, I'm like, no, we got to there's something obviously not working, because I always had we had the most sophisticated dashboard. So it's like, New York is not working. Why isn't it working? Oh, blah, blah. I'm like, no, no, no. We need better analysis. This is coming out of COVID. I'm like, you can't tell me that, because that's not even true. Well, I just think you have to know your business and be honest about it, because business is hard and it's
Yeah.
changing all the time. So if you're not going to I always say, if you're not going to fix it, somebody else, like the competition, will fix it for you, right? You're just
How
giving
did
them a
you
lot of time.
I'm gonna take your idea because I could definitely be more on the you're very cup half full, which is so honestly inspiring because I always say to Jody, I'm like, you're eat or be eaten. And I think part of it for you has really just been that you're such a strong leader because you've had all of these challenges and at no point were you like, yeah, it is like you're like, yep, it's a challenge, but here's how I'm going to fix it. Like very solution oriented. And especially given what the market is now and how challenging things are. And
Yep.
frankly, how challenging things have been for the last couple of years, really since the 2021 peak. You can see the companies who are going to come out of this, who have taken the challenges, they're going to be really strong. And they're going to be strong leaders and they're going to be strong companies because if you say, yeah, I'm going to back down and I'm going to take this, it's like you can't. You
No.
will not succeed.
You know, one of my favorite questions, when I launched the book, Diane von Furstenberg threw me this amazing book launch party in her space in New York, and it was full of entrepreneurs. We had an overflow crowd, and this woman's like, she's like, I've got this company and blah blah blah, and it's really hard, and women get less than 2% of money, and do you have, and went on and on and on. Do you have any advice? And I said, first of all, it is hard, so you got to get over it. Secondly, you have to decide, okay, you're either in or out. And if you're in, so what if it's hard? You just keep going. You figure it out. And if you really don't have the stomach for it, then get out. But don't assume it's going to get easy. It's not. And I did say, which is true, it is not easy for men entrepreneurs either.
No.
I mean, no one, maybe occasionally, you read the story like Mark Zuckerberg showed up in his robe or something, got $100 million. All right, maybe that happened, because he was such a bro, but it didn't happen with the second check. All right. It's just people aren't just going to give you money. It's always going to be
Well, and
hard.
not only that, true to you, and part of our relationship and friendship came because we also did work for the Real Real and your compensation work. And let's face it, you as an entrepreneur always knew that that equity component was the wealth creation, and you certainly weren't doing this to, be successful for everybody else. There was also a component where you were very ambitious, and the mix between cash and equity was important. And not only did you do it for you, but you did it for your team. So, and that changed obviously because you raised a lot of capital.
You know, Jody, that's such an important thing. And even when we took the company public, anyone and their family who had been in the company 5 years actually could come to the event. NASDAQ said they've never seen anything like it because they've never seen such diversity and they've never seen so many well-dressed people in the room. But it really was diversity that threw them over. And I would say that I I felt that if I was gonna work this hard, and some people never understood it, and then but if I was gonna work this hard and the company's doing well, I needed the team. It couldn't just be me. And so why wouldn't they make money on it? Why wouldn't they be able to buy a condo or a house after this IPO'd? And I some people, they'd come in, they're like, "I'm not making enough money." I'm like, "Well, we can give you more salary, or more equity. You do what you want, but here's your options, but you can't have both." That was the other thing. You can't have both. So what track are you on? And honestly, it could have worked out terribly and they would have been really pissed the rest of their lives because they
Think
didn't
with you
take
at
the
that
risk you
level
route.
of
take.
your
That's the risk you take because we have a division of Jay Thelander called Complander, and it's the other end of what Jody and her team does for companies on the consulting side, where it's for individuals looking to understand compensation in the global private capital markets. Because especially for what you're saying, that equity piece is really tricky, but it's really
It is
important, and it
tricky.
could also amount to nothing. As much as it could, right? I mean, it could amount in a condo or a house if a company is successful, but you're also taking that risk with them.
But we built Complander so that because the Thelander business is only for companies like the work we did with the Real Real. But then if someone on your team was given an offer of more cash or equity, we now have a place where people can go for individuals to look and say, what does I don't even know what equity means. And so that part is where we tried to level the playing field. And in many places where there just isn't sophistication, and if they don't have a CEO like you where they may ask you and you would explain it. So we've been really transparent and tried to open this up for career opportunities for people in the private markets, because innovation, and maybe this is a good way to start to wind up, innovation is not going anywhere. And people like I mean, you're already onto your next act. So what are you up to now?
Well, wait, before we talk about this, I just want to talk about the work you're doing is so important because all right, both from a CEO level, but from an individual level. Because what would happen is people would say, well, I don't even know how that compares. And there was no way we're going to say our job was to make sure equal jobs got equal pay, right? But we weren't going to expose everybody's salaries. I mean, that was people wanted to talk about their salaries. That was their business. But what it became really hard is when we were hiring people, even in the ops center, and we would give them 5,000 shares that would vest over, at some point we had to cut it because we had so many people in ops centers, but that would vest over 5 years. Now they would be like, I don't want that. I don't even know what that is. That's worth nothing to me. I want more money. And we'd like, but what if it was worth $10, a share? And that was their start. That was if you came in at $15 an hour. So it comes down to the more education and the more transparency and the fact that you have comps for people and can explain it. I just want to underscore, I don't know of any other firm that could do that and offer that service. And it's so important. Half of the questions I get asked by entrepreneurs I don't know how to ask for comp. I don't know how to build out comp plans for my team. and I'm like, okay, let me tell you, I was on a board and the CEO asked for more. And I actually said, we need to get you guys in and take a look at what's going on in the company. 'Cause I think he's got a rich plan, but I don't know. I don't know for the size company. So
Right.
there aren't many people that have that kind of transparency and comps, and it's really important. So what am I doing now? Well, the company I started after I left RealReal, I think I'm selling it. So this month, all right, let's hope I am, because I think it needs a bigger, broader home. I'm speaking a lot. I'm helping entrepreneurs, and I'm leaving some space for the first time to see what happens. The other thing I just did, which if it goes, it could be really fun. I I don't think I can mention it, but there's a bunch of really fun reality shows coming out that are
Yeah, you
sort
did
of,
mention this. So no,
yeah,
you don't
that are
have
s
to. Yeah.
I can't talk about the name of it, but it's like, basically female entrepreneurs who are actually given real prize money and real consulting, but they're put through it's sort of apprentice meets Project Runway.
Well, if you
Um,
need any help for someone to be on a panel or walk around the show, Morgan and I are glad to do that. I was on The View once, but Morgan and I were on Dr.
You're not.
Phil once too.
Oh my gosh.
We were on Dr. Phil with a client of
This,
mine who had this,
this
and
was
then
the
we'll wind up,
craziest
but this
thing.
is
No, Jody's gonna leave out the details of this because I remember this way too fondly. This was like before smartphones, and I had Jody's leftover like mini BlackBerry phone, and I
Oh
was
my gosh.
and then she had a client who had, again, before smartphones, it was called Radar, and it was where the parents could read the text messages online. And so my mom and I was a big instant messenger, and I loved the texting, and I was in middle school, 6th grade, and I remember texting guys saying that I loved them. And my mom was like, came downstairs and she was livid.
That's
She's
a
like,
good
"What
one.
do you mean you're telling all these people you love them? Like, who is this person?" And I was like,
middle school.
it's
Morgan was in middle school.
Oh my
I was
God,
like,
I love this.
it's a text message. Like I don't even know who this person is. And she's like, "What do
Okay,
you
but
do?"
long story short is this was the good cop, bad cop. So we were on Dr. Phil because I was the hovering
It was the
mother that
mom
had
using
caught
it.
things. The momager who had done a good job because I caught this, Morgan heading in this direction of having potential like meet and greets that weren't so legit. And then there was the other kid who was on Dr. Phil on the same episode with us they didn't find out till after an incident had happened. And so, yeah, well, so
It
Morgan and I
was
are
like
happy to
Joe
be on your show.
Oh my
I was like,
gosh. Well, look, I don't know what's going to happen there because I was a guest star, but the producer did say, I want to build a show around you. So he goes, once this
"Julie,
one's done, let's have
you're
a talk.
incredible.
Yeah,
Seriously,
you're
you
incredible. We could go on, and I think this is the longest episode we've had on Caplander, and I mean, it's just such a pleasure and a delight. I know we're going to see you in New York, which we can't wait to do. And with that, we thank you so much. You are just our fearless leader on so many fronts.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see both of you. Thanks so much.